From the Library of Congress in Washington, D.C.
Presently they saw their mother coming out of the drawing room with a visitor following her. Jane and Michael could see that the newcomer had shiny black hair, rather like a wooden Dutch doll, whispered Jane, and that she was thin, with large feet and hands and small, rather peering blue eyes. "You'll find that they are very nice children," Mrs. Banks was saying. Michael's elbow gave a sharp dig at Jane's ribs. "And that they give no trouble at all," continued Mrs. Banks uncertainly, as if she herself didn't really believe what she was saying. They heard the visitor sniff, as though she didn't either. Well, now about references," Mrs. Banks went on. "Oh, I make it a rule never to give references," said the other firmly. Mrs. Banks stared. "But I thought it was usual," she said. I understood people always did. A very old-fashioned idea to my mind." Jane and Michael heard the stern voice say, "Very old-fashioned. Quite out of date, as you might say." Now, if there was one thing Mrs. Banks did not like, it was to be thought old-fashioned. She just couldn't bear it. So she said quickly, "Oh, very well then. We won't bother about them. I only asked, of course, in case you required it. The nursery is upstairs." And she led the way towards the staircase, talking all the time without stopping once. And because she was doing that, Mrs. Banks did not notice what was happening behind her. But Jane and Michael, watching from the top landing, had an excellent view of the extraordinary thing the visitor now did. Certainly she followed Mrs. Banks upstairs, but not in the usual way. With her large bag in her hands, she slid gracefully up the banisters and arrived at the landing at the same time as Mrs. Banks. Such a thing Jane and Michael knew. They gazed curiously straight. Well, that's all said. Silent. As long as I expect, that's What was her name? Poppins. What else did she do? Can you remember?
Well, she did lots of magic things.
Oh, yes, but tell me what they were. That's just not enough to say magic.
One thing I...
Well, tell me what you remember most about Mary Poppins.
Well, the tea party I remember most.
The tea party in the air. What is the name of the story?
I think it's Mary Poppins.
Oh, come on,
Back,
no, it wasn't. Laughing Gas.
Oh, that's the chapter.
That's the name of the chapter. You're right. I said story and you said chapter. Well, God, who has questions to ask? Michelle.
Do you have a hobby?
A hobby? Well, I don't know. Maybe gardening, growing roses, perhaps. You know there's a rose called for Mary Poppins?
There is?
There is. And there's also one coming that's called for me. Can you believe that?
Yeah.
Well, I think that's wonderful. Mm-hmm.
How did you get the idea to write Mary Poppins?
Oh, dear. You know, that's a question that's always being asked me. I don't know. You wouldn't ask that of a poet, you know, where do you get the ideas? And anyway, where do you get an idea? Suppose you have an idea that you want to go and buy some candy, or that you need a new pocket knife or something. Where do you get the idea?
Well, when you find out your
From
own
the
pocket knife
situation
is rusty.
That's true, but that's true. It gives you the idea, but really, where does the idea come from? You know the answer. You don't know where it comes from. I don't know where it comes from. That's why it's so magic. That's why it's so mysterious. You've no idea where you get an idea.
How old were you when you started writing books?
How old? Oh, books, not books. I didn't start to write books until I was grown up, but I wrote poems and stories. Oh, from the, as long as I can remember. I've still got some poems from the time when I was 6, my mother saved.
Do you like writing books or poems better?
Well, first I liked poems better, and now perhaps I like writing books. I'm not quite sure. A bit of both. Mm.
Which book do you like?
Have you written
Which of the Poppins books do you like the best? Do I like the best? Well, you know, it's like a mother with a baby. She usually likes the baby, the last one, best, at any rate for quite a time. I just love the 4th one, Mary Poppins in the Park.
Yeah.
That has a lot of my childhood in it.
Does?
Yeah. The Park in the Park, you remember the story of the Park in the Park?
Yeah.
Where they all go, Jane makes a little park in the great big one, and then suddenly they don't know whether that little park has grown larger or the people have grown smaller, but suddenly there they are all together, the proper size for the park. It's really a story about dimensions. Do you remember that one?
No, I don't. No, but
Oh, but do read that. When you get home, promise me you'll read it?
Yeah.
Because it's one of my favorites, simply because I used to make little parks like that. Yes, what are you going to say?
have you ever written any books besides the Poppins books?
Oh, yes, I read lots besides the Poppins books. Or have I written any others? Is that what you mean? Well, there's The Fox at the Manger. Haven't you read that?
No, you never wrote any more.
Well, that's the story about... there's an old legend, you know, in Europe that on Christmas Eve the animals have the gift of speech, and that's about a story about that. How the animals talk on Christmas Eve, The Fox at the Manger. And then there's another one called I Go By Sea, I Go By Land, which is a story of children being evacuated to America from England. You ought to read that. I'll tell you about the war.
When did you meet John Keats?
Who?
John Keats.
When did I meet him?
Yeah.
I don't remember that I ever did meet John Keats. You mean John Keats the poet?
Yeah.
But you know, John Keats the poet, he's a beautiful poet, but he died a long, long time ago. You might say he's still living through his poetry, but I never met him except by loving his poetry. Do you like his poetry?
Yeah.
Well, so do I. Which do you like best?
Oh, I don't know. I kind of like them all.
Ode to the Nightingale?
Yeah.
Oh, he's a wonderful poet, but I never met him. Maybe I'll meet him in heaven.
I was always thinking that you had.
No, but it's very nice of you to think that, because I'd like to think that I'd been living when Keats was alive, and that I might be living when some other beautiful poet, maybe around the year 2060, was still writing.
Did you live in England when you wrote the Mary Poppins book?
Yes, in the country, in a very old house that was older than William the Conqueror. It was built before 1066. And we know that because William the Conqueror made lists of all the houses that were in England when he arrived. And this house was on that list. It's called the Doomsday Book.
Is it still there?
It's still there. Still there.
Have they made sort of a museum sort of type thing out of it?
Why? Because Mary Poppins was written there? No, I don't think they have. What?
Well, it's so old. Do you think they would have made a museum sort of?
Well, it was bought by an anthropologist who was very interested in very old things, so maybe he'll preserve it and give it to the nation one day. I don't know. What you got to say, Michelle? Nothing to say, but you all said you had so many wonderful questions. What about you?
Well,
You're shy because it's television.
yeah.
Yes, come, Lindley.
Are you planning to write any more books lately?
Yes, I'm writing 2 at a time. Not one with the right hand and one with the left. No, but sometimes I write this book and sometimes I write the other book. You know, just how the mood takes me.
Are you right? Well, what do they feel to be an author?
How does it feel to be an author? How does it feel to be a school child? Tell me.
Well,
Anything different from anything else? An author's just an ordinary human being. He just eats and sleeps and walks and enjoys himself and talks. Quite right.
are you writing any more Mary Poppins books?
Well, you know, I thought that I'd give Mary Poppins a little rest. Or rather, no, I just don't have any say in that. She comes when she wants to come. And she goes, as you know, when she wants to go. If she comes tapping at my door and it seems necessary, yes, I will. But I must wait for her.
Do you have any books of your poetry you've written?
Yes, but I'm afraid I don't have them here, and I think you'd have to be rather grown up before you read those.
I suppose so.
Well, I don't know, but I think you'd like them better then.
Do you write any adult books?
Well, you know, I think that Mary Poppins is a grown-up book. I never thought that it was going to turn out into a book that children would read. Don't think for one moment it was written for you. It wasn't. But you know, no books written for children are really written for children. Do you mind that? It's rather interesting to know, because people don't really write for anybody. If I was to write for children and say, well, children would like this, or a specific age would like that, then I'd be always having that kind of audience in my mind. And then things wouldn't be quite so true. You remember Beatrice Potter said, you've read the Potter books?
Yeah.
Peter
A number
Rabbit
of them.
and Taylor of Gloucester, marvelous book. She's my archangel. And she said, I write to please myself. And that didn't mean anything grand and arrogant and so on, but it had to please her in order to be a success. And I write just to please myself. And then if it pleases me, maybe it'll please one or two other people. Yes.
I was wondering if you might have had a childhood anything like Rudyard Kipling's childhood.
Rudyard Kipling, no. He lived in India, and he was sent home from India, do you remember? If you read his short stories, you'll read a lot about him, though he doesn't say, this is me. But if you read Bar Bar Black Sheep, that's very like Kipling's childhood. No, I think I didn't have a childhood like that. I lived in the subtropics, and we were far away from any books, and didn't have a great many toys, but it wasn't at all a limited childhood. It was lovely and sunny and simple and imaginative. We didn't have any television, but then we invented a life that was as good as television any day.
Yeah.
How were your mother's feelings when you started writing poems?
She liked it. So did my father, but they didn't take much notice of it. They didn't say, here we've got a genius or anything like that. They took it as a matter of course, same way as you eat porridge.
Do you have any brothers or sisters?
Yes, I've got two sisters. And so now ask me some more questions. Because you came armed with questions. Which book do you like best, Lindley? Which of the Poppins books do you
I
like
think
best?
I like Mary Poppins.
You do? You know, that's the one that most people seem to like. Then they go on to the others.
It's a little more original.
A little more original, you think, than the others. Oh, that's interesting. Very.
How did Mary Poppins get to know Bert?
You tell me. You know as much as I do. You know, you mustn't forget that a reader is half a book. A writer does so much, and then his publisher takes it and puts it into a jacket like this and puts it out into the world. And then the writer is finished with it. The writer doesn't know any more than the reader does. The reader has to use his own imagination. How do you think she knew Bert? There are hints. I didn't put the hints there, but reading the books, I've come to see that there are hints. Yes, perhaps you know.
I think she comes to meet Bert because she's already met him before, or perhaps he's just like her, only he really doesn't do the same things.
Yes, I think she has met him before, but I don't think he's just like her. Do you? No. I don't think so. I don't think he belongs in her world. I think he's a very humble, adoring friend in the ordinary world. But I don't think he really comes out of Mary Poppins' world.
No.
Do
He
you
comes out of a
agree?
world of his own, I think.
Well, he comes out of just the ordinary, simple world that the Banks family belonged to. But I think Mary Poppins comes from a slightly different world.
Yeah, she can ride on clouds.
No, I don't know that she ever rode on clouds in the book. She certainly rode on her...
Tea party in the air.
Tea party in the air, yes, indeed.
When did you start getting interested in writing books?
Well, I think very early, very early. Though, of course, when I wrote poems as a child and stories, I never thought of them being published. That wasn't in my mind.
Well, how did these Mary Poppins stories become to be published?
Well, I was writing them and I wasn't thinking anything about publishing them because, as you see, I was writing them just to please myself. And then a friend saw this book half finished and said, but this I like this very much. And I just laughed. I said, but I'm just doing it to amuse myself. And he took it away and took it to a publisher, and then it all started.
So you began writing the others?
Afterwards.
In what order do these Mary Poppins books come in?
In what world?
What order?
What order? First Mary Poppins, and then Mary Poppins comes back, and then Mary Poppins opens the door, and you'll remember it's in that book that what happens to her in that book, the third book?
I think she opens the door in the shadow on the window.
That's right, and
leaves.
she goes away for good. That book makes very many people very sad. Lots of children have written to me and said, you shouldn't have done that. You made us cry. Very reproachful. And then you remember there was a fourth book. And the fourth book was really put into the same time that the others had. So that although she doesn't come back and forth every time, you can always read more stories about her.
One of the books around Christmas time, she gave some her new gloves to a girl who walked down out of the air. Did you make it so that this girl was actually a person from Mary Poppins' world, or was she entirely in another world of her own? Because they both seem to be in the same world.
Yes, that's a very, very good question. You know, that's about the best question that's ever been asked me, and the most perceptive. Of course, the story of Maya. Do you remember who she was? She was one of the Pleiades. And that constellation, if you look up, I forget, I think it's in the western sky at night. Anyway, it's not very far from Orion. Very, very small. And the last one of them is very seldom seen, the smallest one. You remember, she has to be looked at through a very, very strong telescope to discover her. And the Pleiades were the Greeks, the ancient Greeks thought that they were seven sisters in the sky. And that's why I wrote the story. And maybe Mary Poppins does belong in that world. Who am I to say, but it's a very good guess.
Maybe she's the seventh sister.
No, I don't think she's the seventh sister. Maybe she's the aunt.
Were the Mary Poppins books that you wrote your favorite that you wrote?
Well, maybe. Perhaps. I don't like to say too definitely.
Which poem do you like the best?
I've told you, Mary Poppins in the Park. I like that best today. Maybe tomorrow I like Mary Poppins. I'm changeable. What are you going to say?
I forgot what I was going to say.
Well, just think. Put your head in your hands and see. What do you say?
Which poem do you like best?
Well, I can't tell you the poems, but I can tell you a poem. One of the earliest poems I ever wrote was, and I was very, very young. If I had a star out of the sky, I'd light a fire with it to make toast by. That was the first verse. I can't remember the other verses, but that was the beginning, and they all dealt with things like that. And you know, last night when I was thinking and talking to people in the Library of Congress, I thought to myself, you know, who is it that comes from the stars and makes toast? What does the poem remind you of?
Well,
she always smells of toast. Do you remember? Her crisp apron is very crackly. Doesn't it remind you a bit of Mary Poppins?
Yes.
It does to me. I think I've always been thinking about her, unknowingly. Lindley, you have very bright eyes. I'm sure there's a question in them. Who writes books here amongst you? Who writes stories? Who writes poems? You do? There, you see, that really makes you talk. And why wouldn't it? You talk about yourselves. It's proper. Can anyone say me a poem? Say me one.
This isn't too good of a poem, but the airplanes take off from the ground after one whole hour of waiting around, with airfare so nervous of air flight's unsureness, and hoping and praying to get down and praying to get back safe and sound.
But that's very good. I think that's a lovely poem. That's exactly what airplanes do. Whenever I am flying and I come back, I just say, oh, thank God, down on the safe, good earth again. Who else has got a poem?
I have a question.
Yes, ask a question. That's what you're here for.
Where are the different places that you've lived besides where you lived in your childhood during the war?
Ireland. After all, I am very largely Irish. My father was an Irishman. And England. And then I've been a lot over the world. I was a lot in America during the war. And, well, I've been to Russia. I've been all over Europe.
Where were you born?
In Australia. What do you want to say? You're a good questioner.
No, not again.
Which one of the countries in Australia was it?
It was in Queensland, the one that goes up in a peak like that. You know, a big long finger stretching up to the Timor Sea.
How long have you been there?
Oh, I was there just in my early childhood and teens, and then I came to England.
Did you write a book there?
No. Well, now have you got a question? Has your question come back to you?
Yes.
Yes.
When Mary Poppins leaves, she always says something, well, at least she sometimes says something about other children, visiting other children. Well, why haven't you written any stories about her visits to other children?
Well, you know, there are clues, and you have to be a good detective to be a good reader. What about in the story, I think it's in the third book called The Marble Boy. Do you remember the little statue?
Yeah.
Amelia?
Yeah.
Evidently she's known him before, but where? We don't know. I leave that for you to find out.
Hey, I got an idea.
Where?
Maybe she met the chimney sweeper.
Yeah, maybe
As
she
a
met
child.
the chair. Chimney sweep as a child.
Oh, maybe she did. Maybe she did. But what about the one in the fourth book called The Children in the Story, where she meets the three princes called Florimond, Veritane, and Amor? Don't you remember? There's a clue there, but you must read that. You must read it and just see if you can find that clue.
When you wrote Mary Poppins, did you write her as a person who always stayed young or as a person who grew older?
That's also a good question. I don't think she grows any older, but if you notice, the children in the books don't grow any older.
Yeah.
If they grew older and came to go to school and so on, I'd have to bring it into the world of ordinary time, which isn't the proper world for the world of imagination, and so they remain just the same age. It's a good question. I don't think she grows older. Do you think she grows older?
In a way, yes. Sometimes, as the stories progress, you get the feeling that she's maybe gotten, say, 3 or 4 months older.
Yes, 3 or 4 months. I wouldn't put it at years.
I think she has not grown older, as we say, it was sort of adding years, but I think she's beginning to know some more about these children, and when she goes through the wind shadow or door, I think she knows enough about them, and I think the children knows enough about themselves now, so she can go away and hope they take care of themselves.
Yes, that's wonderful, and it's absolutely true and exactly right. It's beautiful. Of course it's true. They've learned enough from her to enable her to go. And maybe that's what happens to every family she visits. I don't know, but it's a very good, you've thought it well out. Well done. Shown me something.
Are there any Mary Poppins books in Russia?
Are there? We don't know because we don't know what goes on in Russia. I wish there were. And because there they publish books in hundreds and hundreds and millions. And I'd like to think of little Russian children reading them. After all, most children in the world can. In Japan and all the European children, the Scandinavian children, the Spanish children, and the Portuguese children. And even some Chinese children can read it because it's been privately translated into Chinese.
Where are the places you have written some of these books?
Always in England. No, the third book was written in America. As you'll see if you really look and if you really seriously read the books, you have to read the books to ask questions because there's a little notice there about the 5th of November, which is very like your 4th of July.
Oh.
Read it when you go home, and you'll see where that book was written, the third one. It's my American book.
How long were you in America?
Oh, I was in America for 2 or 3 years during the war.
Who did the illustrations in Mary Poppins?
Well, look in the front. I don't believe in asking a question that answers itself. See? Mary Shepherd. She's the daughter of the man who did the illustrations for Winnie the Pooh.
How long does it take you to write a book?
How long? Well, it depends, because I'm not a writer who sits down at a desk at 9 in the morning and goes on till 6 at night. But maybe a year. Because I'm very careful. I write it once and then I write it twice, cutting down and cutting down and cutting down, and then I write it 3 times, and the third time, that usually does it.
How long does it usually stay at publisher's office?
Not long. I think they're rather glad when it comes, and then they print it at once, and then it goes out, and there you find it.
Are most of the poems and books that you've written fantasy, like Mary Poppins?
No, not necessarily, not necessarily. I don't think Mary Poppins is fantasy, you see. It's not a word I really like. Because if you look it up in the dictionary, and all of you, when you go back to school, look it up in the dictionary, you'll see what fantasy means. Something unreal. Phantasm, a ghost. No, I think Mary Poppins is really very real. She deals with reality. And in order to, I would call it the work of imagination more. And really to have anything to do with imagination and to let your imagination have wings and soar, you have to have your foot solidly on the earth in reality. So I don't like that word fantasy very much, though I know it's very popular.
Do you enjoy reading as much as you do writing?
Yes, I think I do.
Are some of your poems in Mary Poppins books?
There are 1 or 2 poems in Mary Poppins books, but that you ought to know. You must look them up. When you ask a question, then in order to get the answer, you have to look in the book for it. Because the book will tell you far more than I can.
The book is the real one.
Do you usually read the books that you wrote over again?
I do. I don't read them all the time, but I go back to them and I discover all sorts of things that I didn't know that were in them. Indeed, I didn't put them in, and I often think to myself, well, how did she know that? Or how did she come to think of that? And then I remember that she is me.
I don't think, I'd like to put it that you are she.
All right, that's just what I've said. Yes, it's true. But you don't mean that I am Mary Poppins, do you?
No.
No.
When you write the books, does it feel like you're in the story?
Yes. Yes. And you think of nothing else.
Well, in your childhood, did any things, not necessarily closely related, but did you have, say, like a nanny, which I doubt?
Yes, but she wasn't at all like Mary Poppins. Not at all. Perhaps if she had been, and if she had come on an umbrella and flown away on it, I never would have written about it, you know?
Yeah. I think that would be just a regular old everyday man.
Yes, exactly. Exactly.
Well, in your childhood, when you were in Australia, did you live in the city or did you live on a sheep farm?
Neither. Outside a city, long, long way outside a city, near sugar plantations.
Have you ever visited the places?
Yes, I went back to visit it 3 years ago, and I loved it. Yes.
How do you keep your imagination from getting too wild and off the track? when you
Well,
think of
that's
these books?
also a marvelous question. That really is wonderful. I think you have to have it like, have you ever ridden a horse?
Yeah.
Well, you know, when you go and you let a horse have a loose rein, and you let him canter, trot and canter and gallop, and let him feel as though he's getting away with it, and you know, that when the time comes, you know that you must rein him in or he'll go over the edge of something. It's a little bit like that. It's a good question. Sometimes the imagination does run away with one. Well, and then you realize, no, that won't fit. I had great trouble with a story in the fourth book, because it took me a long time to work out in The Faithful Friend that there had to be 3 policemen and triplets. And that's when you rein in the imagination and begin to weigh it and balance it and see that you need an extra policeman, an extra brother looking exactly the same in order to make the story go. Your technique has to come in then.
In your imagination.
And then your imagination is reined in by maybe your good common sense.
Do you like zoos very much, or
Do I like what?
zoos very much? Or...
I don't like zoos. I don't like to see animals, especially wild animals, caged. It always gives me a very sad feeling.
Because of Australia?
Because the wild animals should be wild as far as I'm concerned. I know we have to have them in order that you people, or people who will never see wild animals, can know what the world is like. But I don't like to see them, and maybe that's why I wrote the story about full moon. Do you remember? What happens in full moon? The animals are outside and the human beings are inside the cages. If we all went inside cages for a while to live, we'd know what it felt like. You must read it.
Do you like regular kind of pets, like cats and dogs and canaries and stuff like that?
Yes, I've had all those.
Do you have any now?
No, not at the moment because I'm traveling around.
What kind of dogs have you had?
Well, my dog and my cat are enshrined in Mary Poppins, the family dog and the family cat. The dog was called Pompey, and he's in, funnily enough, he's in a story called Halloween. Oh, and then there's another dog that I used to have, a bulldog called Coo, and he's in the story called Balloons and Balloons. You'll see a picture of him. And there's a cat in the 4th book called The Princess Crocus, when Michael goes up to the cat star. So if you look, you'll see my very true dog and my very true cat. Yeah.
I think you wrote a story not only of the cat star. I think you also wrote one of the dog star.
No, I mentioned the dog star in the cat star story. There is such a thing as the dog star. Sailors know it, and you know it, of course. I think his real name is Sirius. He's called a dog star, isn't he? I think so. But since there was a dog star, I felt there ought to be a cat star.
Where's your house now? Regular.
In London.
Where did you get the idea for the dog next door, which is spoiled in Mary Poppins?
Yeah,
Oh, of course, that dog belonged to my great aunt, Andrew, and she had a succession of dogs, and all like that, all very spoiled. But you see, it's very hard to spoil a dog, and we used to encourage Andrew and the succession of Andrews to be more dog-like, and when she was out of hearing, he was really true. Yes.
I was wondering, have you read any of Lewis Carroll books?
Yes, pretty
You
nearly,
like them?
I think all of them.
Do you like them?
Yes, I do. Which do you like?
Well, I particularly like Alice Through the Looking Glass.
I like, that's my favorite too. Did you ever read Sylvie and Bruno, or The Hunting of the Snark? No? I don't like Sylvie and Bruno very much. It's a bit sissy. Hunting of the Snark. It's all in verse. It's worth reading. I agree with you.
This has been a presentation of the Library of Congress. Visit us at loc.gov.